Hello everyone and welcome back to the top 100 comics of the year countdown. Now, if you missed part 1 that went up yesterday, not only did we cover numbers 100 through 51, we also went over all the ground rules about what comics did and did not count. So if you want to refresh yourself on that, a card should be popping up right now. But for everybody who is all caught up, let's go ahead and get into number 50. CODA. Now, as I said yesterday, this was an amazing year for comics. Probably one of the best years I've ever seen since we started doing this list. It was so hard for me to find where to put everything on here because I wanted everything to get up here at the top. And I don't think anything really embodies that more than the fact that CODA is at number 50. Because even though I can look at this book objectively and see problems with it that keep it from getting any higher, this is easily in my 10 personal favorite books of the year. I remember when I read issue number 1 of this, I thought at that exact moment, oh my goodness, this might be the number 1 book of the year. It's that good. And now, several months later, it's at number 50 because there were just that many good books this year. But what is CODA about? Alright, the best way that I can sum this up is that it's sort of like the Mad Max apocalypse. You know the version of the apocalypse where we're all roaming around looking for resources, and there are roaming gangs of scavengers and thieves and thugs and ne'er-do-wells everywhere that you look? Yeah, it's that style of apocalypse, except it didn't happen in our modern day world, it happened in medieval times. It happened in this fantasy world. One day, after all these giant massive wars, all the magic just dried up. So now everyone is just roaming around this giant wasteland, scavenging for whatever magic they can find. When this book opened up, and our protagonist was trying to scrape the magic off the bones of a dragon as the dragon yelled out obscenities at it, yeah, I kind of instantly knew that I was going to love this thing. The world is so imaginative, this idea is so original, and the artwork is gorgeous. I loved looking at every single page of this book. It's almost like if Lord of the Rings mixed with a Slayer album cover. And our protagonist is that perfect embodiment of just fed up. He's just someone who doesn't care anymore. He's seen too much, he's got his own goals, he's struggled too much, and he's just done. And I think everybody out there at some point in your life is going to kind of relate to a character like that. So yes, you guys are going to have to forgive me for just gushing all over this book. As I said, I can't put it any higher because looking at it objectively, I can find problems with it that keep it from getting any higher. But again, I just have to repeat myself. This is one of my personal favorites of the year. Next up at number 49, Bingo Love. This has been one of the most applauded romance books of the year, and I gotta be honest with you, I absolutely understand why it's receiving all the praise that it's gained. This is a love story between two women who ended up meeting when they were in high school back in the 1960s, and both of their parents were very firmly religious individuals who were very much opposed to this, so much so that when they caught their daughters together, one of the families moved away and they were never allowed to see each other ever again. So now, cut to several decades later, after both of them have lived their own lives and they've got their own families and their own careers going, and then one day, they happen to meet again in a bingo parlor, and that love just instantly comes back. This is a book that will absolutely overwhelm you with emotion. When you see this couple together, you feel the pain of them being separated for so long, and it's not like they just wrap everything up the moment that they meet each other. They're both now at very different points in their lives. They're in very different situations. They have families now, and how are they going to explain this to them? Yeah, I actually think this is one of the most original romances I've ever read in a comic. Number 48, All My Heroes Are Junkies. This was Ed Brubaker's very first original graphic novel, and I went into it with pretty high expectations because he has a very solid track record, and the story focuses on a young woman who's in rehab, but she doesn't really want to get better in rehab. She grew up worshiping musicians who were all massive drug addicts, so she actually looks at it as something to be proud of. But she ends up meeting this guy while she's in rehab, and he actually does kind of want to get better, and they start to fall for each other, and eventually they end up going on the run. And I'll be honest with you, the entire time I was reading this, I thought, well, you know, the characters and the dialogue are pretty good, but it's not quite up to what I would expect from an Ed Brubaker book. I was kind of expecting some kind of a punch in here. And then there comes a reveal towards the end of this book that makes you look back at every single line of dialogue that has been uttered completely differently. And when I got to that point, I felt like the legs of my chair had just been swept out underneath me. It is a Usual Suspects style reveal. I'd go into more details, but then I'd spoil Usual Suspects for everyone, so just read the book for yourself. Trust me, that reveal makes everything worthwhile. Number 47, Sentry. I'll be totally honest with you guys. When the Sentry came back, I was excited simply because Donny Cates wrote a really good story with him, but when they announced that the Sentry was going to be getting his own series, I had to remind myself, yeah, I didn't really care about the Sentry all that much. I enjoyed his first series. I think he's got an incredible concept behind him, but, over the years, my enthusiasm towards him has kind of waned. But then I found out that Jeff Lemire would be writing the book, and I became interested all over again. I thought this book could be fantastic if Marvel just stepped back and let him do whatever he wanted to do, and I really get the sense that's what Marvel did. Because this book has an original premise, to say the least, in which the Sentry, someone who has the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns and can be the greatest hero of the world, can't use his powers, because if he does use his powers, his evil half comes out and destroys everything that he tries to save. It does as much bad as he does good. So he has forced himself to try and live a normal life, but he still has to get this power out somehow. So he has Doctor Strange and Iron Man build this giant fake virtual reality world where he can go into it and just live out his superhero life, and the Void will do no harm inside this fake world. Until one day, his former sidekick finds out about this, and he is none too happy about that. This story was very engaging, and it all led up to a finale that, honestly, the only word I have to describe it is ominous. It was a finale to a book that, honestly, I was not that excited going into, but by the end of it, all I could think was, oh god, what happens next? What happens next? You have to tell me now what happens next! This is too freaky of a cliffhanger. Jeff Lemire is a guy who can do really dark, emotional, terrifying sci-fi stories. All of that was crammed into this Sentry story. Number 46, Star Wars Dr. Aphra. I know a lot of die-hard Star Wars fans out there are going to have their own opinions on this, but in all honesty, it still shocks me that the best Star Wars book out there right now, or at least arguably the best Star Wars book out there right now, is the one starring a character who was created just for the comic books. But that just says a lot about how far a really great character can go. Dr. Aphra has been such a breakout character in her own series, and the ragtag band of teammates that she is forced to pair up with in this series are almost just as good as she is. This is a collection of characters, each of whom could lead their own series, or at least they could lead their own series if Dr. Aphra wasn't, of course, someone who would backstab you in an instant. I love that this book is not afraid to remind us constantly throughout it. Yeah, remember, Dr. Aphra is a bad person. But honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why this book works so incredibly well. It's because they were able to flesh out this character and give her so much backstory and give her so many emotional motivations with every single thing that happens in this book that, yeah, no matter what she does, you still kind of cheer her on. And again, that kind of goes for almost every character in this book. This book really feels like there is an actual fully fleshed out world in the Star Wars universe that you are now entering whenever you pick up every single issue, and that's kind of what a Star Wars book should feel like. Number 45, Milk Wars. Now, as I mentioned several times before, when I arrange everything on this list, I try to look at the entries objectively. I try not to think about my own personal opinion. I try to think about how well this appeals to the audience that's aimed at. And in years past, we have had Doom Patrol on this list, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of Doom Patrol simply because it's not my type of book, but I can look at and tell this is a book that is absolutely going to work for the audience that it is aimed at. So when they announced that Doom Patrol would cross over Justice League for a big event called Milk Wars, I went into it the same way that I've been going into Doom Patrol over the past couple issues. Just, yeah, I know this isn't for me, but I need to know what happens in it. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out, oh my goodness, I actually do really enjoy this. And at the same time, I can see how the fans of Doom Patrol would also enjoy this. This book that was meant to be a crossover between Doom Patrol and Justice League kind of feels like an event that actually would satisfy everyone out there. It captures the weird magical nature of the Young Animals line of DC books, but at the same time has the big superheroic action that you would want from the superhero side of the DC books. But beyond all that, it's also just a great love letter to DC's weirder side. There was a moment in the very first issue in which they basically try and explain why you need the really weird stuff out there like Doom Patrol, why you need the really freaky side of this superhero universe, and I absolutely agree with them, and I think that this book really did make that statement well. Number 44, Doomsday Clock. I know there's a lot of people out there who are having problems with this book because it is such a slow burn and it's taking so long for the story to progress. I am 100% okay with that. I actually love that this book is taking something that we were all waiting for, and they're not afraid to still take its time. They are moving chess pieces around a massive board with every single issue, and whenever a brand new player gets introduced, or they finally make some kind of a reveal, it actually feels rewarding to me. It feels like, yes, this is the thing that everything has been leading towards. And in a day and age in comics where you kind of feel like you need to get as much out there as quickly as possible, it's really refreshing to have a book that wants to just take its time. And because they're willing to do that, it does make every single issue have a much larger impact on me. And again, while I understand some people having a problem with that, to me, that is a huge positive for this book. Number 43, Flash. I've been enjoying this series all year long. I've been enjoying this series since it first came out, but the main reason why this gets so high on this list was because of Flash Wars. When I saw that being promoted, I thought, okay, it's going to be Wally fighting Barry. I had no idea what they actually had in store for us. The return of Hunter Zolomon, seeing him just twist Wally West around and play with his emotions, and by extension, playing with the emotions of all the Wally West fans out there, and taking all that and leading up to a massive finale that was one of the best moments in any comic this entire year, yeah, that absolutely gets the Flash this high on the list. Number 42, Detective Comics. This was the year that we saw James Tynion wrap up his run on this series, which means that it was also the year that we saw them wrap up the whole Batman family storyline. This idea of Batman trying to bring together an entire team of other Bat folks to be able to watch over the city, that was a wonderful idea that he had for this book, and unfortunately, he couldn't really take it with him, which means he had to disassemble this team, and he did it in a way that just felt crushing with every single issue, and one of the reasons why it was able to successfully have that kind of an impact on us was because he was not afraid to have these characters talk. He was not afraid to have entire issues where people just sit around and just discuss what happened and discuss the impact that it left on them. I love character exploration stuff like that. I love seeing characters being able to be fleshed out by really being allowed to express themselves. It makes them feel so much more three-dimensional, and when three-dimensional characters have really upsetting things happen to them, it makes you, the audience, get so much more attached to them. It makes you, the audience, so much sadder for having to watch them go through that. Number 41, Infidel. Now, we did an entire special spotlighting this during our month-long Halloween celebration, so I'm not going to go into too many details here, but I will just come in here and say, I love when horror can have a message to it. I love when horror can try and capture something about our current state of culture and really be able to put it up there on the screen. And this is an entire series all about a woman who is being haunted by basically the ghost of fear and intolerance and prejudice. It's a story about someone who is having their entire life wrecked and being driven to the point of madness by something that no one else can see, but specifically targeting them because simply of who they are. And it makes a lot of statements about prejudice in the real world, and honestly, it's something that I've never seen from a horror story before, and I've read a lot of horror stories. But another reason why the book gets this high on the list is simply because of the artwork. Whenever this ghost pops out, you feel like the book is melting in your hands. You feel like you yourself are going insane, having to look at this monstrosity that's being created right out of thin air in front of you. Number 40, High Heaven. This is the story of a man who's kind of just your average nobody. He's down his luck, nothing seems to be going his way, and then one day he dies. But, much to his surprise, he found out that he gets to go to heaven. He goes to St. Peter, the whole thing, he gets his own place to live up there, he gets the robes, everything. And he slowly starts to learn that heaven sucks. This is an idea that I have never really seen in a comic before, and it's executed in a way that's not just there for laughs, but also for soul-crushing depression, which I know isn't the best way to promote a book, but I've always said that the point of art is to make you feel an emotion, and as I was reading this book, I kept looking at the protagonist and thinking, I don't think I have felt worse for a protagonist in a book this entire year. This is a guy who just never had anything go his way in life, and now he is being forced to live in this terrible little apartment, eating terrible little food, with terrible little neighbors, and that is his quote-unquote reward for the rest of eternity. However, that's not the entire book. After that, it becomes about him trying to figure out a way to escape this. How many times have you ever read a book about someone trying to escape heaven? Yeah, it's nothing that I've ever read before. It's one of the most creative series that I stumbled across this year. Number 39, Heavenly Blues. I swear I did not put these two together on purpose, it just kind of worked out that way. From a story about someone trying to break out of heaven to a story about a group of criminals trying to break into heaven. Yes, this is a story about people who were sentenced to hell, but they've decided that they are going to risk everything to try and get back to life. But in order to do that, they have to break into heaven and drink from the Holy Grail. So, needless to say, they're taking a pretty big risk, because if you think hell is bad, try seeing what angels do when they really want to punish you. Now, last year, this was one of our highest rated books of the year, and the entire reason why this isn't any higher this year is simply because only 2 issues of it came out. So, as I said, it's kind of hard to crack that high on the list when you have so few issues, but the finale to this storyline was fantastic. I love these characters and seeing what happens to them at the end. I'm not going to spoil anything, but let's just say I went for a ride. Speaking of big finales, at number 38, Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man. That's right, you heard correct. If you've watched this channel for long enough, you know I wasn't really a fan of Dan Slott's run on Amazing Spider-Man. Little did I know he was saving quite possibly his best stuff until the very end, and even someone who had problems with his entire run has to step back and say, yeah, that absolutely deserves to be in the 100 best comics of the year list. When I saw that his final storyline was going to be Norman Osborn getting the Carnage symbiote, I can't lie, I looked at that and thought, that kind of sounds stupid. And yet, instead, it presented Peter with probably the greatest threat he's ever had to face, and we saw Peter and everybody in his life being pushed to their limits. It was like within one battle, Dan Slott brought back everything he had written in his entire run on that book, and watching that much history being crammed into a fight was truly a sight to behold, and it all led up to one of the biggest heartbreaks of his entire run, as Peter had to say goodbye to his dear friend Flash Thompson. The finale for that character didn't feel like he was just being killed off for no reason. It actually felt earned. It felt like we were watching this character really being pushed to his limits and doing stuff that really embodied everything that we loved about him and his entire journey from his creation. And then, to cap it all off, that wasn't even the final issue. After that storyline ended, he came in here with one final issue, and it was the best thing he wrote in his entire run on that book. Just think about the fact that he was on that book for a decade, and the best issue of a decade-long run was the last one he put out. That is a huge compliment to give that issue. Now, at number 37, yet another big finale this year. All new Wolverine. This year, Tom Taylor had to say goodbye to Laura Kinney, and he reminded us with his final storyline why we loved him on this book this much. Not only did we get an issue in here that was just a one-shot focusing on Gabby and Deadpool and their pet Wolverine, which was one of the most fun single issues of anything that we read this entire year. And then not only did we get another issue that was all about Laura having to answer for some of the sins of her past and really exploring who she was now as a character, but then we get the final storyline of Old Woman Laura, in which Laura Kinney in the future as the Queen of Madripoor realizes that she's dying. And they now live in, surprise, surprise for a comic book future, something of a utopia. It's a world where the heroes have pretty much won. Except for in one instance. Dr. Doom is still out there, and he's keeping several heroes kidnapped. So she has decided that with her last mission, she is going to go out there and try and free them and kill the last big supervillain out there. And that story became a wonderful send-off to a series that was so good, it's kind of hard to think of how any one storyline could be an appropriate send-off. Out of all the creators to leave titles this year, none really hurt more than watching Tom Taylor have to leave all new Wolverine. Number 36, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America. After the Secret Empire event of 2017, there's a lot of people out there who kind of just wanted to see Steve Rogers return and just be regular plain old Captain America again, but you can't sweep everything that happened in Secret Empire under the rug. Someone pretending to be Captain America took over the entire country and handed it over to Hydra. That's not exactly the kind of thing that you can just forget. And Ta-Nehisi Coates came in here and he addressed that in a way that makes you realize what that meant. The best way that I can describe Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America is it has weight to it. Every single issue of it that you read, it feels important. It feels like everything that is happening in that issue is massive. And not in the, oh, someone's collecting Infinity Stones or Galactus is dropping down kind of way, but more in a, how are we going to save everything that Captain America represents kind of way? How is Captain America going to come to terms with the things that happen kind of way? It's heavy and crushing and epic in the character exploration way, which is something that we don't get nearly enough of in comics. Number 35, Koshchei the Deathless. You're all going to have to forgive me because I'm like 95% sure that I mispronounced that name. Koshchei was a character who popped up several years ago to fight Hellboy, and this year they decided to give him a miniseries to flesh out his origin, to explain how he came to possess his undying powers, how he ended up working for the witch Baba Yaga, how he ended up fighting Hellboy, how he ended up betraying his father. They had a lot of ground to cover in this book, but what they ended up creating is one of the best medieval haunted fairy tales I've ever read. Everything in here feels like it is coming from some ancient Slavic fairy tale. Not the bright, shiny, happy ones that you see in Disney movies, but the really dark, scary ones that all those bright, happy movies were based on. This book knew the exact tone that it wanted to establish, and it captured it in every single page. Number 34, Black Bolt. Yet another amazing run on a book that came to an end this year. Saladin Ahmed did an incredible job in this series getting inside the head of King Black Bolt of the Inhumans, and this was the year in which his quest came to an end and delivered the final step in this storyline that really did kind of harken back to everything that we loved about the issues that came before it. Everything that we loved about the relationship between Black Bolt and the Absorbing Man was all captured here. Everything that we loved about the relationship between Black Bolt and the young child that he rescued from the prison was all in this. Really, this was a finale that was a perfect salute to everything that had come before it. Number 33, Justice League Dark. I've always found the idea of the Justice League having a dark horror-themed team to be a little bit weird. But if there's anybody you can hand that off to make it work, it's James Tynion. James Tynion knows superheroes, he knows really great character dynamics and interactions, but most of all, he knows horror. And this year he brought all of that together in order to make this book work. He was able to convince me that Wonder Woman should be a horror-themed character. That is a crazy idea, but James Tynion is able to just infuse every corner of his writing with just something supernatural, something creepy, and he was able to absolutely sell me on that idea. Number 32, Abbott. After his successful run on Black Bolt, Saladin Ahmed brought us his very first creator-owned series with Abbott, which is a story about this detective who is investigating crimes all across Chicago in the 1970s, only to discover things aren't what they seem. There's something supernatural going on here. If you're someone who enjoys noir stories, but especially the brand of noir stories that had that unique grittiness that you could only find in the 1970s, then you're going to enjoy Abbott. And if you enjoy stories where the line between reality and fantasy, where this world and the next one can be blurred together, then you're going to absolutely love this book. Number 31, Fearscape. Now, if you watched our episode yesterday, then you heard me say that Vault Comics are currently putting out some of the most unique and original fantasy and sci-fi books of anyone on the market, and I don't think anything captures that better than Fearscape. This is one of the most creative ideas for a book I have read all year. Basically, the premise behind Fearscape is that there is a world where all of our thoughts and all of our fears are made reality. So, this bright shining figure called the Muse has to come into our world and grab the greatest storyteller that she can find, because only a storyteller can go into this world and slay the concepts of fear itself. Slay the things that are driving mankind to the brink of madness. Shine a light on the darkness so that they can educate the entire world. So she goes and she finds someone that is in possession of one of the best works of fiction she has ever sensed. Someone who is in possession of a manuscript that could change the world. Problem is, the person who is holding it is a washed-up phony who constantly believes everyone is beneath him. So he went and he ended up stealing the manuscript of a better writer so that he could try and learn from it, so that he could see what this person was going to create, so that he could create something even better. He is someone who no one takes seriously. He is an awful author, but he has such this level of pompousness to him that he believes everything he does is brilliant and it's everyone else's fault that they don't understand. And now he's the one who has been taken into the Fearscape to try and fight the darkness. This is an idea unlike anything I have ever read in comics, but it's not the idea alone that gets it on this list. What gets it on this list is how this protagonist is written. I have never read a character who just so perfectly encompassed this feeling of smarmy smugness. Before I was done with the first page, I was questioning, wait, is the writer of this book just that much of a jerk? Or am I supposed to be hating the person who I am reading about right now? And then as a couple pages went on, I realized, oh no, I'm totally supposed to hate him. And this writer is nailing that feeling. Watching the mental gymnastics that this character has to go through in order to convince himself he's actually in the right and he's actually doing the correct thing and everyone else is wrong, even when he is in the act of doing something wrong, is brilliant. It is something that you have to read in order to believe how well they wrote this character. Number 30, Ice Cream Man. I remember when Ice Cream Man came into my store and I and all the other employees looked at that book and said, I have no idea what this is. Because the first issue was kind of just this weird random story about some kid getting his parents killed by a spider bite and a detective looking into it, and there's an ice cream man over there, and there's also a werewolf coming in out of nowhere. Yeah, it was so random, but I kept hearing about how good this book was, so I decided to stick with it. And then it went on to something completely different in the next issue, and something completely different in the next issue after that, and that's when I realized this is a modern-day horror anthology, and it's a better one than any other horror anthology I have probably ever read in my life. This is a story about this small town where bizarre things just keep happening left and right. Sometimes it's something paranormal, sometimes it's something straight out of a sci-fi book, Sometimes it's something very realistic that just has to do with a crime that someone has committed. But all of these stories are incredibly engaging. They make you want to see what happens to these characters, and it makes you care about these characters that you just met in that issue. But the quality of these storylines aren't the only thing that unites them. It's not the only thing that brings them all together. There's also the mystery of who the Ice Cream Man is. Because before these weird occurrences happen, before these people's lives are changed forever by whatever the heck it is that they experience, they have an unfortunate run-in with the Ice Cream Man. Some guy who looks like he is straight out of Leave It to Beaver coming in here and just wishing you a good day. He has got such this old school cartoony personality to him, you can almost hear his voice when you read this book. And after he gives you a taste of his ice cream, your life is changed forever. And this book lets you know by the end of the first trade, oh no, that's not just some random thing that's going to be in the background. He's going to have his own storyline. There is an actual backstory to this Ice Cream Man, and we are slowly going to dig into that. This book is incredible in the way that it is able to present really fascinating short stories with every single issue, but slowly build up this bigger mystery in the background. Number 29, Black Panther. I've been enjoying Ta-Nehisi Coates' run on Black Panther so far. I thought it's done a great job of getting inside the mind of T'Challa. It's done a wonderful job of representing his entire history, of delving into the political side of Wakanda. However, it's always felt like it was missing something, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And this year, he decided to turn the story of Black Panther into a space opera. That is not the thing I would have guessed this series was missing, but apparently it was, because this instantly became one of my favorite Black Panther storylines ever. T'Challa is kidnapped by an intergalactic division of Wakanda that entered space thousands of years ago, and he has his memory completely erased, and now it becomes the story of this man who has forgotten who he is, going out there to free his people from these advanced alien slavers. This is honestly one of my favorite space epics I've read in a long time, and it stars Black Panther, a guy who you don't typically expect to be the lead in a space epic, yet at the same time, this still deals with a lot of cultural issues and a lot of history that Black Panther is kind of supposed to talk about, so they did an incredible job of merging everything Black Panther is supposed to represent with this huge space opera. After reading this, someone just needs to give Ta-Nehisi Coates way more space books. The second issue of this storyline is just Black Panther flying around for almost the entire issue, just taking out one ship after another. It was an issue where every single page kept me glued to whatever the next panel was, and I could almost feel the ships flying by as I turned the page. I am still stunned that this was the thing I was kind of waiting for in a Black Panther book, but man, Ta-Nehisi Coates is absolutely nailing it with this storyline. Number 28, Land of the Suns. This is something of a post-apocalyptic story, however, it's not really about what caused the apocalypse. You know that the water is poisonous, you know that vegetation is scarce, you know there are hardly any people around, you know there are savages out there kidnapping people and feasting upon them, but you don't know why. However, it's not a story about that. None of that is important how we got here. The story is all about this father trying to raise his two sons. However, the father is just trying to make them strong so that they can survive in this world. So he isn't really teaching them how to care for each other, how to love one another. He's not really teaching them things like compassion. He's actually being a very cold father. But one day, when he dies, the boys don't really know what to do. All that's left of him is this journal that he's been writing in ever since they knew him. However, the father never taught them how to read. So now these two sons are setting out into this cold, desolate world with no guidance, just so that they can try and find someone to read their father's journal to them. As you can probably tell from a description like that, this book has a ton of weight to it. It is a book in which even the pages that have no dialogue feel like they are saying so much. This is a book that, much like these two boys, it's cold, it feels harsh, but it also feels like there's a warmth underneath all of that. It feels like there is something special to this world if you can just go out there and try to find that. And a lot of that is brought to you by the artwork itself, which constantly goes back and forth between being horrifying and actually quite beautiful. Number 27, Justice League. Scott Snyder took over the Justice League series this year, and it feels like he just let his imagination go berserk on this book. It feels like he didn't want to just hit a home run, he wanted to throw the entire stadium into outer space. This is a book where in the very first issue, they blow up the moon, and the action and the events keep ramping up from there. It feels like this is a book where no one told Scott Snyder, tap it down. And honestly, I think that's for the best. It feels like this book is trying to pay tribute to the golden age of DC Comics, where incredibly bizarre reality warping events would happen every single issue. And it feels like he's able to take that and adapt it to the modern era of comics. He's able to take that and adapt it into long-form storytelling, which is exactly what he's doing on this book because he's setting up a ton with this brand new Legion of Doom. I know a lot of people out there over the years have felt like the Justice League book has not been as epic as they've wanted it to be, but after the Scott Snyder run, I don't think there's ever going to be a more epic run on the Justice League book. If you are looking for big things to happen every single issue, you can't go wrong with this Justice League. And at number 26, the last book that we're going to talk about today, Skyward. This was an amazing year for really imaginative, fresh indie books. This is a book about a world where one day gravity stopped working. I've never read a book with a premise like that before, and this series stops to really flesh all that out. They show you how horrifying the thought of just lifting yourself up into space and not being able to stop yourself really would feel. It also shows you how freeing that would be, how amazing it would feel to just fly around the world with no restraints on yourself. But what really impressed me the most about this book is how much they thought out every single little detail. They realize how many problems would arise from a world where there is no gravity, and even if they don't go into a big explanation about how they resolve that problem in here, they'll at least say something really tiny in here that paints a huge picture. There are moments in this book that made me gasp as I pictured an entire huge story just laid out there that is all contained in one sentence. Someone will make one brief little tiny reference to something that has to do with living in a world with no gravity that all of a sudden got my mind racing at what that could mean. This is a world that feels fantastic with how it's laid out. The imagination of the writer and the talent of the artist are able to bring this crazy concept to life in a way that actually makes me want to go on and keep exploring it. I want to see way more of every single little crevice of what it is that they created here. But that is it. We only have 25 more books to go through, so come back tomorrow when we count down numbers 25 through 11. Let me know what you thought of these books in the comments down below. And if you want to help support this channel, you can find us over at patreon.com/ProfessorThorgy, or you can always just follow me on the internet at twitter.com/ProfessorThorgy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back tomorrow.